And now it's time to bring out our panel. Let's bring them out. Ira Deutschman, Bob Byington. Come on out, everybody. Adam Siegel and Andrew Ahn, Rachel, and I said Adam. Yeah. So I think there's enough chairs and microphones for everyone. So we all represent different aspects of the film industry in terms of the work that we do. And I'm just going to have them actually, I'm going to let them go down the line, starting with Ira down there, and introduce yourself and what you do in this industry. And then we're going to take it from there. And we're going to talk about our feelings about the future of film. Is there a future? Where are we at right now? What does it all mean? And will the movies, or movies in movie theaters at least, go the way of Blockbuster or the way of vinyl, or grow into something incredible, something maybe we're not thinking of right now? So let's take it away. Ira, go ahead. Introduce yourself, and who are you?
Okay, so some of you probably already know me because I've been coming to the Traverse City Film Festival for 11 years now and moderating Q&As and panels and stuff like that, so you may have heard some of this before. But basically, I've been in the film industry in one form or another for a very long time, starting with running a college film society, and then over the course of the late 70s into the 80s into the 90s, I've run a number of large independent film distribution and marketing companies that I gather is one of the reasons why Michael thought it would be a good idea for me to be on this panel. And in addition to that, I've produced a lot of movies. I recently directed my first film. It's a documentary that is almost done. And I'm a full-time professor at Columbia University teaching business-oriented courses in the MFA film program. So that's who I am.
Thank you. And thank you for all the years of being here at this festival. Andrew.
I'm Andrew Ahn. I'm a writer-director. I'm here at the festival with a film called Driveways, which is screening later today and also tomorrow. It's my second feature film. I did not write it, but I did direct it. My first feature I made in 2016, and it was called Spa Night, and it was premiered at Sundance, and then was distributed by Strand Releasing. I feel like I'm early in my career. I've made these two feature films, and I'm excited to keep going. And I've started to do television work, as many indie filmmakers do now, as a way to make a living, and just trying to find a way to sustain myself while developing my own creative and professional passions.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrew. Thanks for coming. Rachel.
Hi, I'm Rachel Mason, and my parents are in the audience because I made a film about them, and it's my second.
Every parent's nightmare.
Yeah, bad idea. No, actually, it was a good idea because the film has done really well, and it's a documentary which is called Circus of Books. It's about their store, which is kind of a landmark, a really historic place for the LGBT community in Los Angeles. And the film chronicles my family's personal history with the store and the kind of fights they had to face against the federal government at times. And yeah, the film was picked up by Netflix, which is amazing. So for my second film, I feel like it's been a pretty meteoric rise for me. And I will say a little bit about my background is I'm actually a visual artist by training, and I also have always been a musician and a singer, songwriter, performer. And my first film was a complete art house film that I never even aimed in the direction of traditional distribution. So I've always sort of been an outlier, and this to me is fascinating to be part of a mainstream platform. And I think media, I'm seeing some changes to the, to have someone like me have a seat at this table feels like a really fascinating new direction. So. Okay.
Adam Siegel.
Thanks for having me, Michael. My name is Adam Siegel. So I have a publicity agency based in the New York area. My background is actually in politics. I worked on a presidential campaign and helped run a congressional campaign and was heavily involved in progressive issue impact campaigns on both domestic and international issues before I got sucked into the field of film, television, and digital publicity. And so initially, I saw documentaries specifically as kind of one great emerging and growing vehicle to impact on public awareness, to impact on and to bring attention to issues in society and culture. You know, that has expanded in a lot of different ways, but one of the things that we try to do is stay on top of you know, what needs to be done in order to bring audiences, press attention, and other kind of levels of impact and results to the projects that we're involved with. And I'm also the festival publicist for the Traverse City Film Festival, and we work to bring national and regional press attention to the festival and the amazing films and filmmakers that come here.
Thank you. Thank you, Adam, for doing that. And longtime veteran of the Traverse City Film Festival. Your first year 10 years ago, Bob?
Yeah.
Mr. Bob Byington.
Was that my intro? Was that it?
I didn't say anything about anybody else, and for some reason I felt compelled to
I'm honored, Michael.
jump in. Yeah.
It's great to be here. I love this festival, and I was here 10 years ago with a film called Registered Sex Offender that has some fans here. And the film had gotten into South by Southwest. It was a midnight film, and nobody wanted it. It was 2008. And then in 2009, we made a film that was more sort of pedigreed and had gotten into festivals called Harmony and Me, and we sent that to Michael. But then when I was sending Harmony to Michael, I slipped in the RSO DVD because I was so sad that no one had shown it. And then he showed it and won a place in my heart that will never shift. Anyway, so I'm here with a comedy called Francis Ferguson that I hope you go see tonight at the high school.
Thank you, Bob. So what we have here on the stage is, in addition to myself, two filmmakers who have made their second film, so they're in the early part of doing this. Bob, who's done this. How many years actually have you done this? More than 10 years, right?
Yeah, but I only acknowledge my career starting 10 years ago.
Okay, so Bob has done it for 10 years. I've done it for 30 years. And I met Ira 30 years ago. He was at one of the very, very, very first screenings of Roger and Me at the Telluride Film Festival. And Adam has just been a joy to work with, and we in the indie community know him in New York because he is an advocate for independent film and getting people to come see movies. And he's been an advocate for this film festival and got us in the New York Times twice last year. So we're very grateful for that. So let me kick this off, and then we'll open it up to you guys too in a little while. So I'm very, very concerned about where things are at. And I'm not in one camp or the other. I'm not against streaming. I think streaming has been great. I love having Netflix and Amazon and Hulu and watching The Handmaid's Tale and seeing the films that they've supported. The fact that they would buy your film. I mean, you are an outlier. You are out there, and yet the player of the moment bought your film. So that's very impressive. Bob has been able to make all these films for the last 10 years, and continues to make them. And so I want to ask him about how is that going, because I know it's harder and harder to get the money to do this. It's harder and harder to figure out how is this going to be shown? Where's it going to find an audience? You know, is this the future of how we watch movies? What is being lost by not having movie theaters? You know, we're an advocate of movie theaters up here. In addition to the two here, we've either advised, given money to, supported, sit on the boards of a half a dozen communities up here in northern Michigan that have either reopened their boarded up movie palaces or you know, have done other things to bring film in a dark room where 100 people can sit and watch a movie. And so we've done that for everywhere from Harbor Springs to Manistee up here, which is about almost a 200-mile spread, almost, wouldn't you say? Kind of. 70 miles down that way and 80 miles up that way. So, but we do that because we've been concerned that we're going to lose the movie theaters. And I think some of us as filmmakers are concerned about how are we going to take our work to an audience. And is it an audience if it's just somebody sitting alone at home, putting it on pause to do everything else you've got to do at home? Is it is it a movie if it's not seen on a big screen? And,
Well, I can assure
wants
you
to
that
start?
the people who saw Brittany Runs a Marathon last night had a much different experience from the people who are going to see it on Amazon, you know. And I was thrilled to be watching it at the State Theater. I think if I'd seen it streaming, I think I would have been multitasking. I think I would have shut it off. I wouldn't have had the cumulative effect. You know, I wouldn't have had an emotional response like I did. So it's like night and day. It's a completely different experience.
Yeah, I had that same thought, and I think the director did, because it's an Amazon film, so it's mostly going to live on Amazon Prime. They're going to give him a theatrical release, as Netflix and Amazon sometimes do. But you're right, from the get-go, the humor, especially at the beginning of the film there, that just sets you up.
It's collective.
Yeah, I wondered the same thought. If I wasn't with other people and didn't hear all the laughter, which is kind of contagious, would it be the same movie? I don't know. I mean, Ira, what do you think about all of this?
I have so much to say on this subject that I'm afraid to start.
That's okay. I want to finish breakfast, so go. I'm just gonna.
I mean, first of all, speaking to the point that was just made, I can tell you that having done, distribution of films for years and years and years, I totally believe that the collective experience, there is something going on that we as humans don't understand, where people are communicating with each other silently in the audience without even realizing it. I've experienced the exact same movie being shown twice in the same theater, where one audience came out and absolutely adored the movie and the second audience hated it. And it was like, universal. How do you explain something like that? And it's just, I just think that people are somehow, there's some sort of waves in the air. I don't mean to sound weird, but there is something going on in that collective experience that absolutely cannot be reproduced at home. So the theatrical experience is something that I think must survive, but my opinion is that it's not as under threat as people think it is. I think that looking at the longer sweep of history, the theatrical experience of movies has been under threat since it started. There's been so many waves of, radio's gonna kill the movies, TV's gonna kill the movies, home video's gonna kill the movies. It's like, but guess what? We're still standing. There's something, and I do believe it's the collective experience that people crave. Now, generationally, right this second, there would be reason to sweat if it wasn't for the fact that there's plenty of evidence that when these threats come up, whether it's to movies or to music or to newspapers or to, there's so many things that have been disrupted in the last, couple of decades, that there's a moment where the novelty of that begins to, begins to sort of ease out, and what ends up happening is that it comes back around again. And there was a moment in history I would say in the late 50s, early 60s, that parallels what we're going through right now so specifically in terms of the rise of television and the fact that people thought that nobody was going to go to the movies anymore, and that the way that the major studios responded to it is exactly what they're doing now, which is getting way more conservative about what they made, thinking that they had to spend way more money. Companies collapsed. The backlots were all sold off for real estate. And guess what? There was a whole group of smaller independent companies that came about around that time that realized that there was a different kind of cinema the audiences craved, and started looking at it from a business perspective very differently than the studios. And I think that that's already beginning to bubble under the surface right now. So I'm a huge optimist. I don't think that movies are going away. I think that the major studios, if I were running one of those, I'd be really worried. Because if there's going to be any competition from the streaming services, it's really going to be to them more than anything else. That you know, it just makes sense from a monetary standpoint. But we can get into this later, but I think that what does need to change is the business model for theatrical movie-going needs to change.
Tell us what that is, seriously. Right? I'd love to hear it.
We have a whole generation of people who basically now believe in subscriptions. They are, you know, they're getting their music by subscription. They're, you know, subscribing to all these services online. And they think nothing of this monthly charge because it gives them the feeling that they're getting something for free, even though they're paying for it. And, you know, as some of you know, and I'm sure you do, Michael, there was an experiment. It turned out accidentally to be an experiment. It was a business plan called MoviePass. And MoviePass was fated to fail from the day it started because the numbers never added up. They never really did it just didn't work. But what it proved is that if people have that feeling of, you know, like it's not going to cost me incrementally more to go to the movies one more time this month or two more times this month or whatever, people showed up in droves. And 2 summers ago, when MoviePass was at its height, was the moment when there were 5 documentaries that summer that made more money. I mean, that was like the best documentary summer in so long. And why? Why all of a sudden the movie, I mean, because movies are always great, right? There's always good ones out there, but I think it was MoviePass. And already this summer, right now, there are even the major studio movies, they're bemoaning the fact that box office is going down. It's because MoviePass doesn't exist anymore. Meanwhile, AMC, Regal, Cinemark are all experimenting with subscription models. AMC has close to 1 million subscribers at this point. I mean, I'm going to give you 2 quick examples, one of which is my dad, who lives in an independent living place in New Jersey, who goes to the movies 3 times a week right now. He lives near an AMC. He never went to the movies that often. And then my daughter. Okay, this one's a better story, and you're going to love this. She was a MoviePass subscriber. She rebelled against the family business, had no interest in movies whatsoever. This was true when she was growing up. You know, just she had other interests. Movies were not part of it. Refused to talk about it at the dining room table. When my son and my wife and I were talking about movies, she'd like go, "This is so boring," and she'd leave the room. So MoviePass comes along. She lives in Western Massachusetts, and she started going to the movies more often. And I get a phone call from her one day saying, "Have you ever heard of this woman, Agnes Varda?" I was like, "Yeah." And she was like, "Well, I just saw this cool movie called Faces, Places, and are there other Agnes Varda movies I could see?" And I was like, "Yeah." And so I started giving her lists of films. So MoviePass went bust. And guess what? My daughter bought a membership in the local art house in Western Mass. So like I just believe that when people go to the movies and they have that experience, they just want more. And that the solution is ours to grab.
That's the most hopeful I felt in no, because I know the truth of that here. I mean, look at just this 1 week in northern Michigan. We'll sell or the free movies. There'll be 120,000 admissions in these 5 days, and I know people still want this experience, and I do worry that somehow we in the baby boom generation haven't served them as well as maybe we could have. That something got lost in the film literacy of this, but you're right. I think people do love going to the movies still, and I know I have an AMC pass. I have that pass, and at first I didn't want to do it. It's like $19 a month, and I'm thinking, yeah, but in New York City when I'm there, it's $19 to go to the movies. Yeah, for one ticket, and I'm thinking, I'll bet you over the year I will go see one movie at an AMC a month on average. And it has worked out in this first year. It's exactly right. For the cost of one movie a month, which would have been 12 movies in 1 year, I saw 15 movies. So I saw 3 free movies, and now I'm hooked. And I had Movie Pass. And my sister, who had stopped going to the movies, just people reach a point, they just gave up on the movies. They thought it was all Marvel or whatever. And no matter how much I try to say, some of these Marvel movies are amazing. She stopped going. I got her Movie Pass for Christmas, and boom, that was it. Then she started getting her daughter to go with her, another Movie Pass. And it was, I saw what you just described just within my own family.
And incrementally, the movies that people go back to see are the artier films. They're not, because they're going to go to see a lot of the studio movies anyway. But the point is that those people who have those passes, when they go back to the movies for that third or fourth movie in a month, what are they going to go see?
Right.
I do think that the subscription model could really save a theatrical distribution run for smaller movies. Just because I think about when I was a kid, everybody would go to the big Cineplex to see the popular movie that's out, but then it'd be sold out, and so then you'd go to another movie that you maybe hadn't heard of before and go see that and be like, oh wow, that was actually really great. But that can't happen anymore, really, especially in cities where people buy tickets online, and you're like, oh, if it's sold out, then you just go to you buy a ticket for a later show. You don't go see something else,
Right.
And so there is something about having to just go back to the theater, and if you have a subscription, it's a little bit of a you get to do it for quote unquote free.
Did you have Movie Pass?
I don't.
Did you? You didn't.
I
You
didn't.
never got. Did you
No.
get it, Rachel?
No, I
No.
didn't.
No. So you are the younger people up here. Go ahead.
I have a kind of cool story that I was just thinking about when you were talking here, because my first film, and again, because I come out of a completely different world with a different model. I come out of the arts, where just the idea of anything being, a few thousand people seeing something you've done is in the arts that is gold. I mean, you can't, and I've had that before, and everyone's just in awe of that. So this world of millions of people or many thousands just was never on my agenda and radar, and I was an artist and I perform, and so walking onto a stage like this is okay, cool, I'm gonna sing a song and do something performative. And I actually think there's a whole world that's out there based on this experience that I had when I made my first feature film, which I made, very low budget as an attempt to really get my first directing. I wanted to do this film. And I made the entire soundtrack as the backbone of the film. There's no dialogue, it's all singing. It's all me singing the story of this film through different voices. And I naively submitted it to tons of different festivals and got rejected everywhere. And it was a film, it's called The Lives of Hamilton Fish, and it's actually about a really weird coincidence that's true. 2 men, both named Hamilton Fish, died on the same day in New York, and I discovered a newspaper from 1936 that printed their obituaries side by side. One was a serial killer, and the other was a statesman from a really prominent family. So I just had this vision. I wove the whole thing together through songs. It was a really weird film, and I thought, okay, I have an art house film. I'm going to submit it. Sundance, South by. I must get into South by. I got in nowhere except one film festival in Hong Kong that I had forgot that I applied to, called the Pineapple Underground Film Festival. And I remember when I got the email that was we love your film. We want to fly you out. And I was like, wait, I'm in New York right now. I could have gone to the Woodstock Festival, like all these places I could practically walk to. I didn't get in. You're going to fly me out to Hong Kong? So I wrote, like, of course, well, wow, thank you. And then I got the email back, and she said, well, you perform with this film, right? You sing it live, right? And I wrote back, yes, I do. And I hadn't had that idea. And the minute she said that to me, I was like, oh my God, I can tour this like a musician. This is a touring performance piece. And that started the ball rolling. And I had access to museum performing arts complexes, all of which have awesome theaters all around the world. Everywhere in the world, there's a museum with a theater in every city practically, and they have, usually that's where art house films, that revivals, they get brought in. So I just wrote to curators and I got myself a tour. And while I was out there on this tour singing, first I went, my very first stop was Hong Kong, and I'm out there in an audience that's Chinese speaking. They don't even, it wasn't even an English speaking audience. And the coolest thing that happened from that was the director of the festival, Gina Wang, said to me, as soon as your film is done, so you should know, first off, in Hong Kong, it's very on the DL. I had to do this performance in a place where I had to get through the back alleyway of like an industrial complex of forts. It was not a theater. It was a rock venue. There was an underground rock venue they converted into a movie house. All of the tickets were, everyone found out about it by text message. It was because independent cinema is not, it has to be sanctioned there in a different way. So what she said that was so cool to me was that everything that she had programmed in this festival, she was also, in her own kind of subversive way, going to get a theatrical, in a similar way, like a theater in a rock venue. She was creating that in mainland China. And she was sending my film, total art house American film, to mainland China. All the people in mainland China, I think it was Beijing, got to see my obscure little film in a theatrical setting that was like an underground kind of place. Everyone found out about it via text message. It was this underground network of art house film devotees that couldn't find their way to it. And so I was so inspired by just people coming out of the really offbeat, just having to do things in this low budget way and off the side and going against government censors, really. And I was so inspired by that, and doing my tour of this film at museums. Also, I got paid as a performer to perform, and that's how I basically got paid for that film, was I would get a performance fee. Now, I know I'm a weird, that I happen to have that skill set, but while I was on my tour, I noticed that there would be comparisons between me and a filmmaker named Sam Green, who I just learned about, and he was also doing this thing of live performed films. And I was like, wow, this is so cool. Someone came up with a similar idea, and he didn't come out of the performing arts, he came out of the film world. And I had access to this from the performing arts, so I just knew about touring. But he kind of came out at it from a different angle, and he has a similar feeling that I do, which is just, there is nothing like this. It's absolutely special and magical. But to come at how you create that individual experience. So for me, performing, lip syncing live with my film, with a band sometimes, I just created this very special, powerful thing, and I want to continue doing work like that. But with my second film, which just sold to Netflix, it's a completely different film, and it really needs a different kind of audience. That, this documentary is a film that is gay, first and foremost. It's really, and it has, a sexually explicit content in it. And I know that there's a lot of people that probably can't walk into a theater somewhere and just feel comfortable seeing it, but they very well may want to see it at home, in the privacy of their own home. And I do think that having, this global access for my film, my second film, which has really sensitive subject matter, to me feels also appropriate to that next film.
I want to see The Lives of Hamilton Fish.
Cool,
You made
I'll
that
send it
sound
to
so
you.
interesting. No, but we need you to perform it live.
Oh, yeah, I'll totally do it.
So maybe we come back and
Definitely.
do that.
I have to rememorize all those words. Okay, you saw it here.
It's such a great idea. Adam, your job is to put butts in seats. I mean, that's why you're hired, to make sure that there's an audience for these films. What do you think of Ira's idea, and what have you seen? Because you have the somewhat difficult task of explaining our films to a public, getting them to come see the film?
Okay. So as a publicist, it's interesting because our clients hire us for different reasons. Sometimes their primary reason is they want to get butts in seats and they want to have box office revenue. Sometimes they're looking for an audience to tune in on television or to view something on a streaming platform. And sometimes it's for impact, issue impact. They're funded by a foundation or funded by, you know, a bunch of underwriters or Kickstarter contributors or others who are looking to impact on the public thinking, or to, you know, bring attention to an issue that's happening in a, you know, far off place that might be covered in the New York Times, but beyond that, there's very few opportunities to create an emotional connection with the issue. On the box office numbers and the difficulties of getting people into theaters, I guess I'm kind of seeing two things simultaneously. So in 2004, when Fahrenheit 9/11 was released, it brought in over $100 million in the box office. And so we haven't seen a film quite like that, although nature documentaries and independent films, you know, have gotten close to that number. Just in the last few years, I think we're not doing too bad in terms of theatrically released films. Won't You Be My Neighbor brought in $22.8 million. Free Solo, the Oscar winner, brought in $17.5 million. Three Identical Strangers, 12.3. RBG, which was I think opening night here last year, 14 million. And then this year, Apollo 11, 9 million, Amazing Grace, 4 million, Pavarotti, 4 million, Biggest Little Farm, 4 million, Whitney, 3, Echo in the Canyons, 3 million. And so there are millions of dollars in revenue, and that represents a ton of butts in seats in theaters, and those are impressive. I will say that those are, for the most part, being released by big studios. You know, Comcast owns the distributor that put out Won't You Be My Neighbor. Nat Geo is owned by, you know, was Fox Entertainment and is now owned by Disney, et cetera. So there are some challenges in terms of getting independent films. But I will say, on kind of a flip side, last year you programmed an outstanding film called The Russian Five, and it was self-released. They didn't get a major distribution opportunity. They self-released the film, put it into theaters across Michigan, and then we got involved at handling publicity for that film around the country, and that film grossed over $500,000 in the box office for a very small film. I thought that was incredibly impressive, and that's at a level higher than a lot of Oscar-nominated documentaries. And then we just worked on another kind of sports-related documentary that grossed over $500,000 about a sports hero. And so it's I guess I would say it is, you know, I am optimistic about where things are. I also, you know, kind of look at these issues in a slightly different way. I have 2 teenage daughters who the majority of the content that they're consuming is through streaming platforms, and it's insane. My 16-year-old daughter watched all 80 episodes of what's it called, Breakout, or Prison Break on Hulu. To me, that's insane, right? I'd rather her be watching, you know, incredible content and seeing, you know, documentaries, you know, that change her perspective. But I also feel like she and my other daughter are on these streaming platforms and have access to many of the best documentaries that are coming out. Sometimes those documentaries are originals that are only available on those platforms, but sometimes what I'm seeing is that films go from the theaters, can recoup some of their costs, and then eventually go onto streaming platforms, whether it's video on demand like transactional VOD like iTunes. And so in the example of The Russian Five, that film, because of the buzz and publicity, broke into the all-time iTunes bestseller. It's ridiculous, but it did that well because it found its audience, you know, and it made hundreds of thousands of dollars there. But I think that there are opportunities on streaming platforms as well for non-originals to find their audience. And it's at that place that I'm also extremely excited, because whether you're in a taxi cab in New York, or you're, you know, over you know, at a barbecue with friends, people that are not at all involved with the entertainment industry will now bring up in conversation the greatest documentaries that they've been watching over the last few months. And it's not one, it's like 10. And talking about the greatest indie films, you know, narrative indie films that they have watched and found on these platforms. So, you know, that's the perspective that I have on these things. The biggest one of the bigger challenges on my end is I'm finding that advertising through Facebook and Instagram is a, you know, more low-cost and direct way to reach audience members, to reach potential audiences, than through media relations. You know, there has been you know, a shrinking of the number of media outlets that cover film and entertainment, and that becomes a big challenge. A lot of newspapers that used to have film critics no longer have them and pull from wire content, right? So we're having to adapt to those things, and that's where films that focus on issues, or films that touch on some zeitgeist or something in culture or society, or bring attention to you know, a different perspective, are so important, because those can break through.
Do you share Ira's optimism about the theatrical experience, considering the story you told us about your 16-year-old who watched 80 hours on streaming of
So the same teenagers that have, for $11.99, their family is buying into Hulu, and $15.99 buying into Netflix, and free Amazon Prime through our Prime subscription. Those same kids are spending a lot of time going to the AMC theater. And I agree with Ira. You know, our family has a couple subscriptions for AMC. And like you said, for about $20, you can actually go to 3 movies in a week and up to 11 in a month. And I think the vast majority of people are not doing that. But what it does is it offers tremendous value. And when I look at things, when I think about when I had just emerged from college, or was in college, the cost to have cable and was outrageous, and I thought the value was debatable, right? But I think that now the value of every one of these platforms and these subscriptions is pretty damn good, and the quality and the access that you have to a lot of content is impressive. And so I'm feeling pretty good about things at the moment.
Bob.
How do I feel?
How do you feel?
Well, we made this last film based on we had a film that was on Amazon in 2017 that they gave us a good deal. They gave a lot of filmmakers at South by Southwest the same kind of offer, and it was a much cleaner, better offer than these so-called mid-level or the distributors that are vanishing, that have been sort of stamped out by Netflix and Amazon. Those deals always came with a lot of, well, you're really not going to get your money clauses. And the Amazon deal didn't have that. It was a flat, simple deal. We'll give you, every time someone watches an hour of your movie, Infinity Baby, we'll give you 31 cents. And we'll also give you $25,000 up front. And it was way better than anything else that we got offered. And we took it, and we liked the deal. And I think Infinity Baby's made it's made low 6 figures on Amazon. So we made the new film, Francis Ferguson, with that model in mind, and Amazon yanked it off the table because they had overpaid. They had overpaid for the Sundance South by films. They bought a bunch of South by competition films that people didn't want to watch, all due respect. And So their offer right now is 10 cents an hour. That's their offer to us, is like take it or leave it. And it's still kind of like, even though they've subtracted 70% of the money, it's still kind of the best deal that we've seen. And the interesting thing about the new film is that it's set in a small town, and we've played it in a couple of theaters in small towns. It's a small town story. The story is designed for someone who lives in a small town, who knows that everybody knows one another in a small town. And if you live in Austin, you don't really know that everybody knows everybody in a small town. We made the film in North Platte, Nebraska, and we had to go learn that. I didn't think it was true. And then I lived there for a while, and it is true. And I think the people here kind of know that, right? So we have a much different experience to offer a viewer in a small town theater. And like, we booked the theater where we shot the film and sold, instantly 1,600 tickets, like that, because everyone wants to see it. But we can't get anyone to book it like in Austin. We'll get a film society screening and get, like 85 people to come see it in Austin. So, it's like, it can be discouraging, but it's like also, I think what Iris said is, of course the sky is falling. Of course they're only making Marvel movies. Of course the world is ending. That's always true. It's always true. And then people make cool content.
But what if it's really true this time? That's what I'm worried about. Now, I think that, because here's the other thing I've noticed. There is a malaise that has swept the nation. And I've traveled the country in the last year, and it is stunning to me. It's the only word I can come up with. I don't mean it, obviously, just politically. There's something else going on. There is this low-level, low-grade despair that seems to exist.
Now this is another panel potentially.
Yeah, but here's what I think. I think it's affected the movies. I think it's maybe affected the movies that are getting made, the movies that, and I'm not blaming the studios. I'm talking about us as filmmakers, the films that we're thinking of making. What are we trying to communicate? Do we care about communicating anymore? Have we turned into potters where the potter at the wheel cares about whether the potter is pleased with what is spinning, the clay that's spinning on the wheel?
Well, yeah, I feel like there's a certain kind of like desensitization that's happened like societally, in that we are consuming and confronted by so much content and audio, visual, news, that to a certain extent, in order to survive, we kind of have to shut off. Like, there's so much bad news that you kind of can't read the news anymore, and so that becomes a little bit of this malaise or this laziness or unwillingness to accept new information. And so it does feel very instinctual to me that there's something about the spectacle of the time that we live in, and then the spectacle quality of a lot of the big blockbuster movies. Like, it's like, if you don't have like 30 of the biggest actors in Hollywood in one movie that's super loud and like super long and super bright, that like, people aren't, they're not going to get what they want out of a movie experience. You kind of, it's really hard for, I think, the smaller, movies, the quieter movies, that actually like have so much to offer. But it's just as a society, we've become a little bit like numb to that.
I've gone to see some movies this summer that I really enjoyed. Booksmart, the Beatles-based film Yesterday, Late Night with Emma Thompson. Some of those are just good movies. Some of them are one of them, the Booksmart, I think, is a great movie. And yet there are all these stories in the trades and how they've bombed. They haven't made it. The message is, don't make these movies anymore. It seems like that's what the message is. But I would hate for that to happen. Ira, you've listened to everybody's comments on the stage. A lot of them based, bouncing off how you see the problem. and so you've had a few minutes to think about your new business model idea. I'm just curious what you're thinking down there.
Well, okay, so there's a bunch of things I can respond to here. I think that part of the crisis, just from forgetting about the larger crisis of the country and the malaise, and trying to think about it specifically about the movies, I think there's a crisis that is a lack of imagination on the part of the marketers and the distributors that are in the marketplace. They've absorbed a period of time now where a lot of things that they've tried haven't worked. And what tends to happen is they develop scar tissue where they it's like, oh, that didn't work, so I'm not going to do this again, and I'm not going to do that again, and then they end up doing nothing. I mean, it's just it's an awful truth. The fact is that I think there's room for this terrible word that's not really a word, I don't think, but people use it all the time, eventizing. I loved your story about the way that you did the live performance as part of your film. It reminded me of, as you were telling the story, I was thinking about the fact that the movie that you showed here the other night, that you show every year, Stop Making Sense, I distributed that movie when it first came out, and that was not a slam dunk. That was not a movie that, a concert film of a band that nobody had really ever heard of at that time, that it was going to work in the marketplace. And we mounted that film as a tour, the way that you did, where MTV became a sponsor. They were brand new, and every week there was this anticipation as they put the chyron up on the screen about that it's coming to this town, and now it's coming to this town. And we made an asset out of the fact that it wasn't everywhere all at once. It was like you had to wait for it to come. I mean, that's just one example, but there's many, many examples of things like that where if you have a really good movie, you have to come up with an angle to get an audience engaged. And I just don't think enough distributors are putting the effort into it anymore. I think they've gotten really lazy. So that's one thing that I was thinking about. Another thought that I had in hearing all of you talk about your streaming deals, which I don't have anything against the streaming model. I mean, for certain types of films, it may be the best way to get it to an audience. I do think, however, that business model actually has to change too, because there's way too much competition. And as think about the fact that their way of measuring their success has nothing to do with how many eyeballs there are. They don't really care how many people watch anything. All they care about is a perception of value, which is that people continue to pay their monthly fee. That's all they care about. As long as there's no churn, as long as they're growing. Well, Netflix just reported their quarterly earnings. This was the first quarter where they actually shrunk in terms of the number of people who are subscribing to the service. How much of that has to do with the fact that there's such enormous competition now, with Disney getting into the streaming market, with Warner's getting into the streaming market? How many people are going to subscribe to 5 services, to 6 services, to 7 services? And so something's got to give there, right? So I'm not so sure that the future is in that direction. I sort of wonder whether we're going to be swapping places, and whether theatrical is going to become the subscription model, and that all of the streaming is going to become transactional, which is to say that I'll subscribe to Downton Abbey, but I'm not going to subscribe to everything that PBS does, because it's just there's not enough hours in the day. So these are things just running through my mind. I mean, I just kind of wonder whether that model really has the huge future that it would appear to be right this second. And it's another reason why I'm optimistic about theatrical. But we do need people who are pouring some imagination into how to get people into movie theaters. I mean, you're doing it with the film festival. The film festival model is a model that works. It makes things feel like more of an event. The same movie that people are coming to see at the State Theater at 10 in the morning or whatever the first show is, that might be some obscure movie that you saw and loved and wanted to share with your audience. That same movie, if you put it into a regular movie theater and just expect people to show up, they're not going to show up.
Disney reportedly has made $7 billion in remakes in recent years. So maybe what we need is to have sequels and remakes of the greatest indies and documentaries to really like juice things.
I'm down with that.
Well, I didn't make a sequel last year, but it sounded like it was Fahrenheit 11/9. And so I'll just ask you this, and then I'm going to open it up to the audience because it's a personal question of mine. You mentioned the top 4 grossing documentaries last year, and the 5th one was mine, which made $6.5 million, which for any documentary filmmaker could make that would be like, hog heaven, and they'd have a career for the rest of their lives. But for me, it was seen as a failure, and so how in the year when I guess I thought people would want to have Trump explained how we got him and how maybe we can get rid of him, the top grossing movies were about nostalgia for Mr. Rogers, with a time that we wish we had and is now long gone, and a rock climbing movie. That there were 3 times as many people that wanted to watch a guy possibly commit suicide by climbing a rock than watch Fahrenheit 11/9. And early on, I had thought, I'm not going to do the typical release model. I wanted to try. We've talked about this for years. I was just going to release it for 2 weeks in theaters, so it would be on streaming, but literally make an event. Do it with local groups all over the country. They would get part of the box office. They could use it for organizing, and at the end of each of the 14 nights, at the end of the movie, I would come on live on the screen. We'd FaceTime or Skype or use whatever satellite method, and there could be a Q&A in 500 theaters around the country, and I gave up on that because I had to spend my time making the movie and not creating a distribution model for the film, and ended up with a traditional route. And this film, I've never had my film open on more than I don't know, maybe 700 screens on the opening weekend. That's a lot for a documentary, but it opened on 1,700 screens. I got some of the best reviews of my life. It was in the 90s in Rotten Tomatoes until the haters show up on Rotten Tomatoes, and then they try to cut that thing down, but it was already certified fresh, and it stayed in the 80s. And so I had all the things like that going for it, and yet I thought, I think I'm going to stop. I'm not going to make these movies anymore because I went through this month or two, and all of us working on the film kind of felt that way.
Got over that, though, right?
I got over it, but it was really debilitating. And because if you feel like you did good work and work that was needed and necessary right now, but maybe that's just up on our high horse thinking it's needed and necessary. I didn't realize how many people, nobody agreed with me that Trump was going to win when I said he was going to win. Now, people quietly, they don't want to talk about it, but people know he's going to win the second term. They don't want that to happen, but they know the possibility now of it happening is there, and that lays, and I thought, well, maybe that killed us. Maybe people are sick and tired of all this. Maybe I should have made a romantic comedy, I don't know, but I'm curious for any reaction on the stages. You can't hurt my feelings, but I think I'm a good case study in terms of if you make a really good movie, the critics love it, the audience who see it love it, that CineScore, that grading thing that they do across the country from the audience, it got an A, even in red states, and yet I was left feeling like, what's the point? Anybody?
I think that much of this conversation has been centered around distribution, and I'll say, like, as a writer director, as a filmmaker, what you just said really resonates with me, which is that these conversations about how our movies get out there affect the way that we think about what movies we want to make, and that's it's really tough where you start to think, oh, like maybe we do have to make the equivalent of like kind of cinematic candy, you know, like when the recession happened, like the most successful industry was like the candy business because it was like a cheap, easy thing that you could buy and make yourself feel better. And is that something that I have to do as a filmmaker, where maybe I don't make something challenging, maybe I don't make something, you know, different or, you know, nuanced, that I make something that has the biggest star, that is super satisfying, you know, maybe it's like a genre film, a horror film. That's something that really starts to wear on you as a filmmaker, and so it is a very, I think it's why filmmakers are often like kind of insane people, because we keep on wanting to do this. The fact that you got over that is like a sign that like that's how you became as successful as you are. And for me as a filmmaker, I kind of have to feel like I'm a little insane in order to keep doing this, because with my 2 features that I've made so far, I've not been able to make a living. And so why am I continuing to pursue this career? And part of it is just because I think I'm a little nuts, you know. I think you kind of have to have that, you know. And I love, you know, to go back to Ira's point, there is something about my film festival experience on my first feature, Spa Night, and this feature, Driveways. My film festival experience has been almost, I think, the most fulfilling part of this. You know, I love being able to screen my movies for audiences that care about film enough to be members or, you know, buy ticket packages to film festivals. You know, this is much of the reason why I keep doing what I'm doing.
I would add something. I mean, first off, I'm a little like shocked that the numbers have any effect on you. It's so weird because, Michael, your films have changed the world. Like, they really have. They've completely changed the world, I think. Thank you. And as a person who saw Roger and me in a film school class, it was for me the very first time. I was amazed. You know, the little guy was walking up to the CEO, pounding on the, hey, listen to me. I got something to say. This company is not right. You know, Flint, Mich, what is happening? You're the guy who does it. And like, so I just like, wow, the numbers. It's weird. I'm like, okay, yes, there are. It's important to think about the numbers, but I mean, wow, I would be like horrified if you ever stop. Like, please, like, don't. And
But when I say the numbers, I don't
Okay.
care. I don't mean the box office. I don't care about that. You know, I sold Roger Me to Warner Brothers for $3 million, and I didn't really have to worry again about getting a job. You know, so it's the number of people that saw it, and Netflix offered me all the money to make the movie at the beginning, and take care of everything, and they would give it a little bit of a theatrical release, and I didn't take that. I thought, I'm going to make one just completely independent money, no ties to any studio, no ties to the system, and we're going to self-distribute it. And it was just such a, on that level, you know. So it, and once Amazon picked it up to stream, now it's of course been seen by millions of people. But we just sold it to them for a flat price, so I don't get the 10 cents an hour or whatever. But I also it's not enough to actually come out even. So that's what it is. It's more like I made that film so that we wouldn't have 4 more years of this. And that's the despair, I think, I feel. And I guess I should add that, yes, I came out of that, and I'm working on 3 new projects, and none of them is a theatrical-based movie. And so that's what I'm saying. And I believe so strongly in this. I, you know, restored and built these 2 theaters here and helped all these other theaters, the film festival, etc. And yet I myself, for my own work now, I haven't decided where to go with that. I mean, I've decided to take a break from putting something in a movie theater. That's what I should be clear about.
It does seem, though, that political and issue documentaries do struggle at the box office, especially recently. And I think you're right. It's part of the times. The most successful films and the films that have staying power in theaters, and I'm only talking about documentaries, seem to be ones that transport us to either a different place or to a different time, right? But ultimately, I think the question is, why are people making those types of films? And you said it's for eyeballs, and for some people, to get people to actually see it and absorb the message. And I think for other people, it's partially just to get a ton of press attention and try to break open a conversation or to move something up kind of the agenda, whether it's in the White House or Congress or something like that. So I think that, I also view documentary films as films that, whether you say can change the world, can change minds, and or can impact on our current our current time, or to energize things. I really there's a great film, I think might be playing today, Slay the Dragon, right here at the festival, about gerrymandering. And it's a small film that is it today? Yeah. It's a small film. I guess I'll be curious to see, because it was picked up, I think, by Magnolia for theatrical distribution, and it's a political issue documentary. But I think that one film has an opportunity to really galvanize people's thinking, especially on the left, on what needs to be done urgently. But then the question becomes, why was that film made? Did they make it to make a lot of money, or did they make it to impact and reset things?
But who's going to say, "Hey, honey, let's go see the gerrymandering film tonight"?
Exactly. It's not really a date. It's not a date movie.
No. Let's open it up for a few questions here from the audience. And yes, why don't you start? You have to speak up. We don't have a microphone.
They're bringing you a mic.
Oh, they're bringing you a mic. Oh, here we go. She's right here.
Yeah.
Commercial films, you see all the trailers, you know what you want to see. But for indies, other than referring to your Traverse City guides, what do you guys see as a good online site for reviews? Or is there a site for trailers to know? Because as Ira said, with 3 streaming sites, if you own them, you can't see it all. What's a good site to find out what's out there?
I think Roger Ebert has the best, most kind of discerning site. May he rest in peace. I really do.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah. RogerEbert.com. Yeah, Roger Ebert's no longer with us, but his wife and widow and friends and cohorts, they run a great site, I think. What do you think, Ira? What's a good place to go?
I would agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, there's still some mainstream newspapers that have a lot of film coverage that will help you. They're going out of their way to try to make sure that they cover more than just the studio.
The Guardian is good, right?
The Guardian, the Times, New York Times, Washington Post. LA Times to some extent. Those are worth looking at. But yeah, I mean, it's not as much as it used to be.
Right. Next question. Yes, over here.
Hi, great discussion so far. I'm Jeff Sass. I'm the author of Everything I Know About Business and Marketing I Learned from the Toxic Avenger, just by the way. Quick question. You didn't talk, in talking about the future, you didn't talk about the...
And it's on his shirt, too.
Of course it is. Always be marketing. Lesson for everyone. But you didn't talk about the actual theater experience. It's wonderful what we see in restoring these old theaters. But what about this trend? It's interesting. First, the home became more like the theater. You had big screens and surround sound and everything else. Now the theaters are trying to become more like the home. You're sitting in a Barco lounge, or I go to an iPic theater in my neighborhood. You're sitting on a lounge chair, and you push a button, they bring you your drinks and your food, so it's like being in your living room. Is that good or bad? Is that trend? How does the actual experience in the theaters affect the future of filmmaking?
I have an opinion about that, like everything else. I hate those seats, those reclining seats. I feel like the difference between television and film is that television is a lean-back experience and film is a lean-in experience. If you're sitting in a Barco lounger in a movie theater, then you don't have the same experience that you would if you, I mean, that whole thing about the way that an audience responds, if everybody's like this, it's like, you know, it's just not the same experience. I hate those things. And by the way, the theater owners will tell you that the minute they put those Barker lounges in, they make more money. But it's just bad for the experience. Well, no, the seats. They'll tell you the seats are an attraction to a certain audience.
People will pay an extra $5 to sit in those seats. I hate it too. I hate them. I hate the seats. I hate the alcohol. I've done my best to keep it out of our theaters here. I don't want dinner being served to somebody. I don't want to smell their dinner. I don't want to watch them eating dinner. The reason we show movies in a black box is so that you block out everything else, so you can all focuses on that story on the screen.
But the Alamo has been one of the few chains that's been able to get the ball, you know, in the air.
And it is a great experience to be at an Alamo Draft House, I think.
The guy in Austin, Tim Leagues, started it, and he just, you know, he had a different idea for it. But, you know, they've been able to get people to see some of these kinds of movies we're talking about. And now he's also at Neon, and they're trying to, you know, they'll do a movie like they're doing the Apollo movie, and, you know, so anyway. He's not a lazy distributor. There are a lot of them. He's not one of them.
Next, yes.
Greetings. My name is Dr. Patrick O'Doherty. I'm here from the University of Minnesota, and I'm the founder of the Minnesota-Cuba Film Society. And at the end of February through March, we sponsor and feature top films out of Cuba, which have got an unfathomable number of awards across the boards. And I see the future of film, distill film, coming out of Cuba. Yo soy Cuba. I think that's where you're invited to this film festival. This is a French name here, Travers. In France, bourgeois is a term of contempt for what happens to their culture. Cuba is not a term of contempt. So I would like to welcome you to the future of film out of Cuba, the proletariat future. Thank you.
We brought a lot of Cuban films here. I agree with you. They're incredible movies. Yes, right here.
That score, I just would like to say we also funded one of the Cuban movies early on and got credits on the screen. But my comment is also about the theatrical experience. And so often, for us anyway, it's much too loud. In fact, for the volunteer film just, 2 nights ago, it was way too loud, and they couldn't do anything about it, supposedly. They said they'd done the sound check. Well, I guess the movies come with a specific level of sound, and you have to use that level of sound.
The documentary on emojis?
Yes.
It was too loud.
For us. And then 2 nights before, when I went to the Friends films, the volume was perfect. A little bit loud in Come As You Are when they had the music, but otherwise it was fine.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else feel that way, that the movies are too loud these days? Yeah, that's interesting.
I can say, like, from a filmmaker point of view, there are many theaters that, like, projection is really low, like the screen brightness, and then the sound system is often, like, very outdated, and so there will be filmmakers who, in a sound mix or in a color session, will, like, ask, you know, the sound mixer, the colorist, to push it. And then I think things like this happen when theaters actually do have good screening, like screening equipment, that, like, then they, like, look too bright and then they're too loud. It's a weird evolution where the filmmakers and the audiences are playing this bizarre kind of game.
But then in the theater, if they get complaints, they should be able to do something about it.
Right.
At least turn it a little bit. Maybe some people want it fairly loud, but there could be a compromise level.
Yeah, you shouldn't have been told that, because there was nothing wrong, and nothing had, you know, and we don't say because we already did a sound check, you know, to hell with you. That's not, I'm sorry that you had that experience. I was there. I sat in the third row from the screen, and the person next to me, and I said, this feels a little low. I mean, I was having a hard time hearing some of the words. So that just tells me that there's an acoustic problem there that we have to fix. Where were you sitting? You're in the back. So
I
it should
was
be
in
harder to hear in the back.
I
I was
was-
sitting 3 rows from the screen and couldn't hear it.
Well, I was in the back. It was way too loud. We left, and the manager was very nice. She said, well, it's probably not as loud down in front. Would you like to go down in front?
Yeah.
My husband left, but I said, okay, I'll try it down in front. But guess what? It wasn't any better for me.
Oh,
It was
okay.
too loud.
That's interesting. Next question. Yes, ma'am. The blue shirt there.
Hi there. My name is Shannon, and I'm a native of Traverse City. I now live in a small town in South Dakota where I am the executive director of a cultural association that is a nonprofit that owns and operates locally a 2-screen cinema as a nonprofit for our local town of 20,000 people. I have a question about the relationship as a small theater, the relationship with the studios and distributors, and how not to get priced out of the business as these studios realize that they should be worried and that there is competition and that they are stagnating. They are driving up the costs to small theaters for bringing movies to screen. And as a small business that needs to keep our prices low because our population, about 30% of our population lives at or below the poverty line in this town, we really want to focus on making film and cinema and cultural experiences accessible to our population. But if we have to pay, for example, the movie coming on Friday is this Fast and Furious Hobbs and Shaw that we had to pay $1,500 in advance for this movie to bring to screen, in addition to probably 60% of ticket sales going to the studio. We sometimes can't guarantee that we will make the money back on that kind of advance. So what mechanisms do you see existing, or is there something we can do in the meantime while we're working on eventizing theater or adding value to experiences? How do we not get penalized for bringing independent films to screen because Disney would rather have us have Lion King for 3 weeks? How do we work through the National Association of Theater Owners to put pressure on the studios? What do I do in the meantime to keep my theater operating while this system changes?
Do you want to take that, or do you want to think about it and I'll say something? Or
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like your problem is the studios. And I mean, I don't know what to say about that, because the solution may not be right for your community, but the solution would be to only play independent films.
Okay, we've thought about that.
You know, I mean, National Association of Theater Owners is not going to be your solution.
Okay.
The independent theaters are not their bailiwick, so I don't think they're going to be all that helpful, frankly. You should think about joining the Art House Convergence, which is, you know, a group of mostly not-for-profit theaters all over the country that deal with these kinds of issues all the time. Do you have somebody doing your booking for you?
We do, yeah.
Okay, because that's one way to try to hammer the studios a little bit, is that if somebody represents a large number of theaters, that
Yes.
makes it a little bit easier. You have somebody booking the state for you, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have a booker that works in a 5-state region in that part of the Midwest who has his, you know, he knows what works in those certain theaters and keeps an eye on that. And he does fight for us, and we are in, as he said, as good of a financial position and bargaining position as we can be, but it's still...
There's honestly no excuse for the studios to behave that way,
Yeah.
because your income is incremental. It's not going to take any income out of any other pocket. Sending a digital file at this point is so inexpensive for them to do. But I think, and I've run into this also, but their attitude, which is horrifying, is that it's not even worth their time to get on the call unless they can make $1,500 or $2,000 or
Yeah.
you know, whatever. And I don't know what you do about that.
Okay.
Hope they go out of business.
Well, then, but actually, I mean, it's in some ways encouraging to know that this is a problem that everybody is scratching their heads about, and that I am not alone
You're
the
trying to
studios,
run this theater. Yeah.
the studios responsible for hundreds, if not thousands, of theaters closing down in the last decade.
Yeah.
When the switch went from film to digital, the small town theaters could not afford the digital projectors, and it killed a lot of mom and pop movie theaters. The drive-in here, one of the, I don't know, 3 drive-ins in the state of Michigan that's here in Traverse City, was going out of business because they couldn't afford the digital projector, and everybody in town, you know, kind of ponied up and tried to help out. And then they won this contest that Honda had put up because Honda didn't want the drive-ins to close. It's part of the car experience. And so they won a grant from Honda, and we kept the drive-in open. But it's the studios are really the villains here. Why do they even want the 1500? Just it costs them nothing to send you digitally the film, and yeah, no. See, that's just they are on a suicide mission. This is one example of it. That they don't care about Deer Lips, South Dakota, you know, and what's it called? Vermilion. That is French for Deer Lips. So. Why you would correct me on that, I don't know, but they're going to have to change, or they're going to realize by doing this to all these towns and the small theaters, they're going to wish they had those theaters back. So we have time for one more question. Anybody like to ask? Way in the back, ma'am. Here comes the microphone. Well, that was, yeah.
The failure, quote unquote, of your movie last year had anything to do?
I can't hear you.
Do you think the failure of your movie last year, had anything to do with just people being tired of people explaining Trump to them, and Colbert every night, everybody every night, and?
But I'm not Colbert, and no one had explained.
I understand.
No one had explained Trump the way I was going to explain it.
No, it was great. It was great. It was a great movie. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
Do you think people just? They get so much of it. I just wondered if you thought.
I think yes, of course, we're all trumped out, and my cable went out for a month here in Traverse City this summer, and it was the best month. I watched zero news, and I just felt light. I went to bed not watching TV, MSNBC or CNN is great. So I get that. I'm one of those people that have overdosed on the whole thing, but it doesn't mean I don't have a responsibility to make sure that the madness ends. And maybe the audience is ahead of me. Maybe the audience doesn't need me to show them the way out. Maybe the audience, the public, the citizens already know. That's very likely too. So, ma'am, you have the last question. Just got to turn. Yeah.
Hi, sorry. My name is Sue, and I live in Southgate, Michigan, and it's a suburb of Detroit. We have an MJR theater that opened probably when I first moved to the community, maybe about 30 years ago, 25, and they have 20 theaters. And when they opened, they said that they were going to have one theater designated for art house independent film.
Well, they have 20 screens at this theater.
They have 20 screens.
One screen was going to be for indie art house.
Well, that has not really happened. They did have Whale Rider many years ago, and I wrote a letter of thanks to the management. I said, this is great. I hope you keep it up. Because the community is called Downriver, and I had moved from like Oakland County, which is a little more prosperous, moved downriver, and I almost get the feeling that the distributors think that our community aren't like in the caliber of independent movies. Like if I need to go see an independent movie, I have to drive about 25 miles either to Royal Oak or to the Maple Theater in Bloomfield Hills, Birmingham. So I just wonder why major chains, and I think the lady from North Dakota, I think she explained it that, they don't feel that they're going to make the money out of showing these independent films unless they get an Oscar nomination. Because when they do, we got the movie The Queen with Helen Mirren, or March of the Penguins, things like that, but it only happened after the Oscar nominations were read. And do you see that ever changing?
Is there a connection between the letter you wrote and them not showing them anymore? Do you feel like?
Well, I don't know. It really did seem to be about the same timeline that all theaters are filled with movies that are like the Hobbs and Shaw or the Fast and Furious, or kind of stupid comedies, you know, that stick around for weeks and weeks. And I had wanted to see your movie, Michael. I thought maybe they would show it, and if they did, it didn't last very long. So that's a shame. And I love this festival. This is my 3rd year coming, so keep it up.
Thank you.
I think, you know, independent art houses, many of them do a great job of cultivating the community and audience locally. You know, a multiplex with 20 screens, you know, even if they have one that's indie, they might not be prepared to build that audience, you know, and keep it going. So that's pretty.
Yeah, that's 100% right, and it doesn't happen overnight. They've got to stick with it to make it happen. The art houses that thrive are the ones that really work it, and the multiplexes just don't have the patience or the expertise to be able to do it, and they tend to give up. Even if they try it, they tend to give up because it's, you know, there's a kind of mantra that I use in my classes at Columbia all the time, like probably once per lecture, which is distribution is easy, marketing is hard. You know, the fact is putting it in the theater doesn't mean anybody's going to come. And, you know, if people don't come, they're going to stop doing it. It's that simple.
Well, also more to the point, fish don't know what water is, and like people in Traverse City don't know that you have like a world-class film festival here. It's bizarre. So it's very strange. It's like Telluride in Traverse City, and nobody knows.
Yeah, I know what you're saying there, but we live in an interesting area here. It's very liberal and progressive, and it's very backward and
Well, being in the
conservative.
State Theater for the first time in like 2009, I could not believe it. Like it was surreal to be in that theater, and to know that you have access to that here. Just like don't worry about what's going on out there. Just like go see movies here. It's unbelievable.
Well, it's definitely not for lack of press attention. You know, I just logged into our TV and radio monitoring platform. No, I'm just saying locally here, it's wall to wall on all local TV and radio and in every newspaper locally. The media around here does an amazing job as a service to bring attention, but there clearly are people that are not consuming that media. Maybe we need to be running ads, spot cable on Fox News or something, right?
Yeah. I don't know. That's another panel, you know. But look, we're doing well, and the Bijou is like, I don't think we've had 1 week in the red the whole time it's been open. It's been in the.
I couldn't believe when you opened that. I'm like, what are they doing? Are they crazy?
It is crazy. It's the only theater in America that has no access. I mean, what I mean by that is you cannot pull a car up to it. There is no road, Grandview Parkway. There's no egress or whatever the other one is of the gresses. You can't get in or out off Grandview, and you can't get from the back, especially in the summer, because the wealthy own the parking spaces for the yachts, and so there's no way to, unless you park on the other side of the Boardman River and walk through a tunnel, then you can get to the Bijou, and yet we have not had 1 week where it hasn't made money. So I don't know. I don't understand it, how it survives even. But we tried to make a nice little screening room with 150 seats, and people will come. But you're right. If I lived in a town like this and I wasn't a filmmaker, I just lived here, and the first time I would go into the State Theater and saw that, I'd go to any movie there just to sit there. You know, just the experience of it. But some of that's been lost, and it's been difficult to try and get people. Remember, 50% of Americans never, ever step inside a movie theater. 50% of the country. Of the next 50%, Ira, you may have an updated on these stats, but of the next 50%, half of them only go once a year. Now we're down to the last 25%. And of those, you know, there's those who go twice a year. Then there's the once a month people. The once a week people, very rare. But, you know, when I was a teenager in my 20s, my 30s, before Roger and me, and even after that AMC deal, I always went to 2 movies a week. Always went to 2 movies a week. And that AMC deal right now would cost me less than $2 a movie to go to go see it on a big screen. So, well, you know, I had a proposal that I had given money to the festival for to start that, to do that across the country, actually, and that's an idea that's still alive.
I have one thought, just because a friend of mine, her film, it's an amazing movie about Merita Mita, the New Zealand Maori filmmaker that Ava DuVernay got as and is working with. I think it's Netflix to no, yeah. Thank God, I got that right. I'm looking at my neck. But Array is her distribution company, and what's kind of a cool new part of the creativity is I think someone like Ava has just, and I do think there are these new, very powerful people that often at this moment I think are coming from minority groups like Ryan Murphy, you know, a gay, very powerful man in Hollywood who, you know, looked at my film and was like, this is awesome, you know, and Ava DuVernay looking at that film, pulling it out of the indie space and giving it these platforms. And I was at a screening where she screened it on Mother's Day all over the world. And it was the most powerful thing because she has a very big Twitter reach to just tell armies of people everywhere, go see this film, you have to see it. This filmmaker who died recently and the world needs to know about, an indigenous filmmaker, a woman. I mean, just an incredible story. And I think for people like me, it's these kinds of, you know, seeing female filmmakers, seeing filmmakers of color just have other advocates online, like telling everyone, go see this because it means a lot to get, you know, an audience for a female filmmaker. And it motivated me throughout the year. I try to see films by women in theaters all the time. It's like my mission. Like I went to Mindy Kaling's film because it just, she even said to the audience, it matters to tell your friends because as a female filmmaker, it's even harder. So I think that kind of advocacy has helped.
I haven't told this story at Traverse City, but 4 years ago, Ava DuVernay had lunch with her, and she wanted me to explain to her how we did the State Theater and how does that work? Because she says where I'm from, Compton doesn't have a theater, and there isn't this sort of thing. And she now, just a few months ago, opened up her own State Theater in L.A. And she took it all. She took the theater that was on the little lot that she does all her producing from, and but that was inspired by what the people here did to support this theater on Front Street, and to get so that L.A. would have something like this. I mean, just if you just stop and think about how kind of crazy that is. But so I do know the reach of this and the impact that this festival and other festivals have. Ira, can I give you the last word here and just take us out on more optimism than I can offer?
Oh my God, I think I'm out of optimism. You know, okay, so I don't know whether you'll find this optimistic or not, but the only other thought that I had that, as everybody was talking, occurred to me is that one problem that we've always had in the film business is that film exists on two completely separate levels, one of which is art and the other of which is commerce. And I think that people get them mixed up a lot. And unfortunately, we live in a country that doesn't support the arts. And so as a result, American independent filmmakers always feel like they're the orphans of the world because there's tons of institutional financing in other parts of the world to create art, and not so much in this country. But what it does do is it creates this feeling among independent filmmakers that I think sometimes their expectations are too high given the realities of the marketplace, because there are people who are interested in film as art, film as politics, film as culture, but it's not as huge as we'd like it to be. And then there's the movies, which there's nothing wrong with that, but it's, you know, it's a very different economic model, so, you know, in terms of how much it costs to make, how much it costs to market, the scale that's necessary to make it happen, et cetera. And every once in a while, there are either bumps in the market where suddenly, because maybe the studios are doing a lot of shit that you know, that where independent films seem to rise together, and there are other times where it's just an aberration, just like a single movie that comes from out of nowhere and actually continues this mythology about the fact that you know, we're always like 2 minutes away from being incredibly wealthy, which unfortunately really isn't the case if you want to make the kinds of movies that you all want to make, and you know, et cetera. So I think that, you know, Michael, you should be proud of having done $6 million on that movie, because frankly, you know, nothing against the movie, but I just think the world we're living in, $6 million is a huge achievement. Yeah.
Yes. Well, thank you for saying that. I'm proud of the movie, and I'm happy that through Amazon on streaming that it found a large audience. But it has made me rethink this theatrical experience, and I don't want to give up on it. But I'm going to come at it from a different place. So. Thank you for sticking around. Thank you for being part of this. And thank you to all the panel here for participating. Enjoy the festival. Thank you.